So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. We're here to listen to Arnoud Molenaar. So he's the Chief Resilience Officer of the City of Rotterdam, also the manager of Rotterdam's Climate Proof programme. He also guest lectures in Erasmus University, but he's more than welcome back to his former stomping ground here in Utrecht University. He graduated from spatial geography here. Back again. So he's more than welcome back. He's also worked around the world. So he's worked in New Zealand and France, and of course in the Netherlands. In his role as the manager of Rotterdam's Climate Proof programme, he's initiated the Connecting Delta Cities network. He's also been instrumental in forming Rotterdam's resilience strategy, as well as forming the basis of the urban water management design strategy as well. He's the editor of books on climate adaptation strategies, and that's a speciality. So without further ado, I'll pass the floor to Arnoud.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the invitation. It's really great to be back again. So, first half of my presentation will more focus on climate adaptation. That's sometimes I say I'm the resilience officer with specific track record on climate adaptation, or climate resilience, as you could call it. And then in the second half I will show how we are really expanding the resilience thinking broader than just water and climate adaptation. And who of you have been working with resilience before? Okay, few hands. And because the word resilience is actually, I think 5 years ago, I never heard about it. But I was working on climate adaptation, and with it, which is also climate resilience. And so resilience to a certain extent is not new, but I think as a capacity for a city, it is relatively new, and the way we try to embed it. So let me start with showing you why we are and have been working on water management already for centuries, of course, and recently started to work on climate adaptation. So this, even without climate change, you could say we have to work continuously on water management in an integrated way, because 80% of the city is below sea level. Rotterdam is a typical delta city, as we call it. The blue area is below sea level, and the brown color is above sea level. And that's I don't think there are a lot of cities like this in the world. But so you could say actually the river zone is relatively safe because it's above sea level. And every raindrop falling in the blue area has to be pumped to the river, and then it will go to the sea. So doing nothing is not an option, because we of course want dry feet, as we call that. And at the same time, the city is urbanizing, it's growing, it's getting more and more densified, and you could say this is also causing a water management challenge, because we get less permeable areas to manage our stormwater. And at the same time, the climate is changing on top of this. So this is not Rotterdam, this is Copenhagen, I think, yeah, Copenhagen. And this is UK, and I can go on for this for half an hour with examples. So for those of you that still are having some doubts about climate change, it's fine with me, but we are facing more flooding, and we are facing more extreme rainfall, and that's a fact. It's not a prediction, it's already a fact. So this is Paris, and maybe a nice anecdote is that my colleague in Paris, when this happened, I text messaged him, and that's the good thing of being member of a city network. And I said, well, I'm seeing this on the newspaper, and you know how to find me, and we are able to help. And he said, well, Arnoud, thanks, but it's not necessary, because the level was 6 meter 90 actually, and only at 6 meter 95 we do have a problem. That's not our way of thinking. We are looking 100 years ahead and try to find out the scenarios and create an action plan, etc. And already in France, not so far away, they have another paradigm on this actually, and looking not further than, well, one day ahead. But this maybe looks Asia, but this is Houston, just to show it's all over the place. And this is Rotterdam. So even after a decade of working on climate adaptation, we sometimes are facing what we call small-scale urban flooding. And so there are people that say, okay, so Arnoud, what you're doing is useless. But my story is that it takes time. It takes a huge amount of time to really get climate adaptive as a whole city. So we have to keep on implementing our measures. And the complex thing always is that I cannot show and make visible what we have been preventing. So a flood is always visible, and then we get complaints. But when we have prevented flooding, yeah, okay, well that's normal. That's why you pay tax. So what have we been doing? And actually, you could say a mark was 2001, a milestone, because in that year we designed with the water boards and some other stakeholders, the first water plan and the integrated water plan, because it was about water quality and quantity, groundwater, etc. But it was actually just only water. So within the water realm, you could say it was integrated, but it was just focusing on water. And years later, we said, okay, but the most solutions are in spatial planning. So we need to make a connection with the spatial planners. So the claims in the spatial planning realm have been linked to the water plan and the other way around. And somewhere in 2008 we said, okay, now we also have to take into account climate change. And somewhere in 2014 we said, okay, it's not only about climate resilience, there are more things changing. We have now to focus on resilience in a broader perspective. And I will come back on that, of course, later. So this, it looks maybe very sophisticated, but in 2001 we did not have the idea that we were going to design a process like this. It's a more organic thing, an organic way of processing, but it is taking into account what is happening and looking ahead and projecting that backwards. And it's in Dutch weerwoord. I think it's weather-wise in English. That's our second generation of climate adaptation already, and I don't think there are a lot of cities that already have a second generation adaptation plan. So, but this is of course theory and process, and an important thing to share with you is that we also, what is typical for our approach is that we're not only focusing on the fact that there is a challenge and a problem and that we have to solve this and invest a lot of money in it. We said, okay, what kind of city are we and what kind of city do we want to become? And we somehow reinvented ourselves as a water city, as a delta city. We have a port because of water. The most expensive houses are waterfront houses. So water is literally a quality and a value. So we said, okay, we want to create a stronger city, a better city, but also a social stronger city. Because we are a port city, a labor city, we are still looking at the big four cities in Holland on the bottom of the list regarding income and regarding employment, etc. And we also need a little bit of gentrification. We need also people with higher income and kids, etc. But then we also have to invest in a better quality city. And we can use water to create a better city and green. So to green the city and to introduce more surface water is good for, then we are making the city more attractive, but also adaptive. That's actually the whole simple thing, that you can combine this. And in 2000, let me think, it was 13, we launched the first adaptation strategy, and actually you could say simply that we were used in the first column to invest in certain measures like very robust and always prevention, keep out the water, big infrastructures, the storm surge barrier, and always from a technical perspective. But the second column is actually well, you could say an additional layer of type of measures that we have to introduce to become more adaptive to climate change. So more flexible, more resilient solutions, maybe allow to a certain extent a certain overflow, a certain flooding, but especially we have to invest on a large scale in small scale solutions, small scale measures. And so from a tile in your backyard up to the storm surge barrier, on all those scales we have to invest in climate adaptation. And we have to use, we cannot keep on going just using technical solutions. So we have to use, maybe reuse, what the nature is providing us. Well, okay, so far theory, strategies, etc., but we already started to implement at the same time, because it's not necessary to really wait until the scientists say, and now we know to what extent the climate is changing, or that we have a strategy. You know we have a shortage for climate storage, for water storage, for example, and we need more quality. So as long as you have some space, you can take measures like this. So on the right-hand corner, that's the Olympic-sized rowing track, good for recreation and maybe even biodiversity if you want, but it's also 4 million cubic meter of water storage. So we combine challenges and we only invest in multi-benefit solutions, solutions that add quality to the city. But that's of course possible when you do have some space. When you go into the center, you have less space, so you have to go and to find other more innovative ways. This actually is maybe a great example, but we do not prefer to build big underground basins. A lot of cities are doing it because of a lack of space. In this case, we made an exception because there was a smart guy from the engineering department, and he said, okay, why not use building this parking garage, use the space underneath the driveway and expand it and create a water basin. And this is a basin for 10,000 cubic meters, and the biggest in Holland, right in the center. So this is really counting to the challenge we have to create more water storage. But it was an exception, and when you would have built this standalone, it would have been millions of euros more expensive. But actually we prefer this. So we decided not longer to put our euros in bigger sewer pipes, because that's not flexible and it is not visible. It is very expensive, and you can build a little bit bigger sewer pipes, but the extreme rainfall events will always be bigger than the storage of the sewer pipe. And if you want to cope and deal with all the events, then you have to build sewer pipes as big as the subway, and that's of course not possible. Even of course there's no space in the underground. So this is what we prefer. It was a grey, very boring square, and I have to mention the names, the Urbanisten. There's a really creative design firm. They said, okay, let's redesign the public space, add value, so that this can be a meeting place for students, and they can play basketball, and there are even theaters organized. So there was also a whole participation process with people from the church and the students and residents. And that's great, but of course it's meant to allow to overflow. And so it's additional water storage, additional to the capacity of the sewer. And actually you could say here we try to combine climate resilience with social resilience. And this is just one piece of the puzzle. So in the meantime we developed several and redesigned several areas in the public space. This is the West of Singel. Maybe it looks familiar to you. Normally, I think 360 days a year it's like that with the statues, but it is allowed to overflow. It's you could say it's an urban floodplain, and this is, I think, a creative way to to add quality, but also to take into account climate change. Another example of such a water square, as we call it, designed together with the kids. They came up with this design. So the schools are involved, and it's part of the education, and that's how we really want to get, well, the people, and in this case the kids in this district involved in such a project. Another, you could say, part of our package of measures that we take is that we are investing in green roofs. Well, maybe not very new nowadays, but 10 years ago it was quite new. And we were the first city in Holland to start a subsidy program for people in the city and companies. And nowadays we have been developing 400,000 square meters of green roof. And that's, on that scale, is really going to count. And helping the city getting more climate proof, or we would say we are regenerating the sponge function of the city, because that's actually what we are doing. A green roof is collecting the rain where it falls and slowing down the runoff to the sewer system. And we used to start with the simple ones, see them, but nowadays you see even urban farming on roofs, and that's again marvelous, because the kids come there and they see the crops growing instead of only in the supermarket, etc. So there's a whole diversity now on green roofs, and we also adjusted the subsidy, because now we require another better systems like this, because now the systems of green roofs have been developing in a technical way, and are able to collect more rainwater per square meter. So the requirements in the subsidy has been adjusted to the new ones. So you could say so far I'm talking about objects like water squares and green roofs, etc. But again, we have to work together with the residents and start to de-pave the city, not only in the public space but also in the backyards. And I will come back on that later. Why? So far, some examples related to excessive rainfall, but we also are facing, of course, sea level rise and changing discharges in the river, and so even in groundwater, so water is coming from all directions to our city, you could say. And this is an example of improving a levee, but also combining it with other functions. So in this case with a park, it's combining two districts now. It used to be, you call it in English, rangeerterrein, a parking space for train wagons.
Train shunting yard.
Yeah, okay.
Shunting yard.
A shunting yard.
Oh, okay, good, thanks. I learned something. Yeah.
Thank you.
And the other thing is, inside this levee there is a 1 kilometer long shopping mall. So we really are combining functions in this case. Another one is, especially it's quite exceptional in a city, and especially in a port city. Of course, we have a lot of stony embankments, especially in the port, of course. But we identified 11 kilometers of embankment that is that we can turn into a natural embankment by creating what we call a kind of a foreland or a tidal park. And in the picture above, and we nowadays have even a tidal park program. And the good thing is, this is done together with the Port Authority, with water boards, with Rijkswaterstaat, with WWF, and they all see the benefits of this. So it was relatively easy to find a couple of million euros to invest in this, because we are reusing the sediments from the port that had to be dredged, and normally it will be brought to the sea, but now we are reusing it to create this, and it's also good for water quality. We are going to use it for education again, and we are creating more of biodiversity, and a foreland related to the levee is a stronger system because it is reducing the wave strength. So maybe when you do this on a large scale, it's not necessary anymore to really make the levee higher. So it has also an adaptive function. Another part of this, well, you could say a package again of how to adapt to climate change, is to invest in floating objects, floating offices, floating even a floating farm. Maybe you heard about it. There's an entrepreneur in Rotterdam, and he started to develop this urban farm, floating farm. Of course, not really urgent for our city, but it's innovation. He thinks, and we think, because he got a permit from the city, that there are cities and other cities in the world, delta cities, that might be interested in such a thing. And of course, a boathouse is not new on a canal, but these objects float in old port areas with a tide of 1.5 meter difference between low and high tide. And when sea level will rise, because it has an open connection to the sea, and when sea level will rise, say for 1 meter, it's okay because it's flexible. And we strongly believe that we can use some of the old ports right in the center, Rijnhaven, Maashaven, to develop floating districts. So far a whole range of measures that we have been already applying in the city related to climate adaptation. And still we think this is not enough. And why? Because climate change is not the only change. We are now we have been coming in an era of change, so digitalization is also what we call disruptive for cities, nearly all cities do have smart city programs, and that's good. So to use these possibilities are great opportunities for the cities. There are a lot of smart solutions to make the city more resilient. But on the other hand, we're also creating new vulnerabilities. Because it can be, well, I come back on that later, why I say you are creating more vulnerabilities. So, and the other one is the energy transition. And this is maybe even more disruptive than climate change. This is especially for a port city like Rotterdam. The whole port, 50 kilometers of the industry is fossil fuel based, and we have to transform this in a more sustainable port. But at the same time, it's interrelated to the city. All systems we use, city heat, and that's residual heat from the port. And in the coming years, we have to make decisions. Are we going to design all electric districts, or are we going to remain this? Very, very complex, and it will touch every citizen, etc. So I mentioned climate change, digitalization, energy transition, and another one is that we are a fast-growing city in the meantime. Not compared to the huge ones, the Lagos in Africa, for example, where I read an article that these cities grow with 100 people per hour. Well, that's not in our case, maybe 1 or 2 per hour, I don't know. But we need 50,000 more houses. And that's a huge challenge for a city like this, because we are already a dense city. So where to put these, and at the same time we need more water storage. So that's why we say we need another level of resilience actually. And so far I did not even mention our wicked problem, and that's the fact that we do have a big group in our city that has a very low income, unemployed, and multiple problems, you could say. So there is a big inequality in our city. And if we do not take into account this social challenge, then we are creating a new stress. And when you see resilience as how to deal with shocks and stresses, but this is already a stress. And so the challenge actually is, how can we use the transitions to also solve is maybe too optimistic, but to make progress in social respect. So you could say there are many disruptive transitions going on in our city, and we have to anticipate to it, but we also want to benefit from it and to use it. And that's why I think we need a new level of resilience. So maybe I think so far we were talking about resilience, and then we were investing in robust systems, etc. But resilience is more complex, is more than just being robust. And Maybe a little, one graph, I think you can handle that. So when you look at the blue dotted line, you could say that's the autonomous way of development of a certain city. And a non-resilient city will not recover from a shock. Like Detroit is an example. They always invested in one specific industry and got a shock on shock, and even became bankrupt. Nowadays they are thriving again. And in theory, you could say a resilient city will bounce back, but also learn from it and get out of it stronger and can continue the path of development. And in Rotterdam, we said theoretically we're not going to wait for a shock or a stress. From now on, in 2016, we launched our strategy. We are going to increase our level of resilience in a structural way. And actually, a new, more or less, discovery is that you could say, regarding certain themes like the social aspects, Rotterdam is on that dotted line, but we have to get that to the green line. And so the specific challenges I think we should focus on to become more resilient. And how? Because resilience is still abstract. So we said let's use these 7 qualities. We are a member of 100 resilient cities, and all those cities use this resilience lens, as you could say. And of course it's containing robustness, but it's also about flexibility. I think flexibility is especially in spatial planning, getting more and more crucial. Because you could say there's only one thing certain, that everything is uncertain. And so, okay, sea level is rising, but how fast? And will it be 1 meter at the end of the century, or 80 centimeters, or maybe 1.5 meters? Actually, it doesn't matter, as long as you develop your package of measures in an adaptive way. And so adaptive pathways, adaptive water management, adaptive delta management. That's to become adaptive, you have to develop an adaptive program. And it's of course also containing redundancy. So when there is no electricity, for example, are you able to be up and running within a few hours? Inclusiveness is getting more important. That's related to what I just mentioned. We have to include people. We have this group that is, well, socially not strong. How can we let this group also benefit from the things going on in our city? Rotterdam is now relatively in a kind of a very optimistic flow, but how can this group also profit from this and benefit from this flow? And even better, how can we get these people on board and contribute to these developments? Reflectiveness, very important. We always say we have to learn from our mistakes, the learning capacity, but we say it, but we do not do it. So we really have to organize this. Do things in an integrated way is easy said, but very, very complex still. And so our resourcefulness, get connections with universities in this case. We're working with the University of Applied Sciences in Rotterdam, and all I think it will contribute to become a resilient city. So in 2016 we launched the resilience strategy with these topics, and you can see that we distinguish several, you could say, themes: social resilience, energy, cyber resilience is relatively new, and we are making progress on this. Even climate resilience, we are not there yet, and we have to speed up and scale up. Infrastructure, also the way we work together, the whole society is changing into a more network society, you could say. And especially the 7th one is maybe the most challenging, also boring one, but that's how to anchor the resilience thinking in all your projects and programs in the city. And not only within the municipality, but also with the stakeholders in the city. So, what do I mean with this next level? For example, we have to work more with the citizens to become a climate resilient city. And why? Because 60% of the whole area is non-public, is private. And as a municipality we can take measures in the 40% in the public area, but then we will not become a climate adaptive city. So we have to include the citizens. So that's why this subsidy program is important, but also this water sensitive program is actually by creating a community of people working on resilience, and they are inspiring each other, and this group is growing. There's another way of working with the city, actually. So you could say we were working for the citizens and then with the citizens, but now to a certain extent it's done by the citizens, and that's what we want. We also have to take into account new topics. So in 2013, yes, we were aware that part of the climate change is also the heat stress and the increase of the frequency of heat waves. But we said, okay, it's important but not yet urgent. Now 5 years later we say it's urgent. And so that how fast it goes. So we also, when greening our city, we have to take into account this aspect more and more. Because heat waves go with droughts, and even droughts can cause flooding, and that's also new for our Dutch, the Dutch that you all used to keep out the water, and always have to deal with too much water, but less water is also a problem. These people there on the left-hand corner, they are cooling down the bridges because they get stuck during a heat wave because it's expanding. So we need other standards for our infrastructure. Water quality is affected. Elderly are really affected. So the impact of heat waves is really touching upon the vulnerable people. And this is how we still look at our secondary levees that's made of peat and clay, etc. It's possible to use sensors to find out are there cracks and what's happening, but we still need a lot of people on a manual way to find out the quality. Another thing regarding the next level thing is to use tools, the smart solutions, and this is an app, the Extrema app. And we were in touch in a network with Athens. Athens, of course, is more familiar with heat waves, and they are using this app, and it can guide you to the cooling places in the city, but also especially places where you can find drinking water, tap water. And my role is not to set this up and apply this. My role is to connect this with the healthcare department, and when they are interested, then I say, okay, well, here I have a tool, and be happy with it. So that's more my role, to connect and to have the overview and to look after the crossovers, etc. Literally, next level is that we more than so far want to use our our roof landscape, you could say. So you could say every disadvantage has an advantage. There was a famous football player who said this. But because of a profound philosopher. Especially in the city center, we do have a huge flat roof landscape. And at the same time, we need more public space, and we need more space for water storage. We need space for solar panels. So, 1 square kilometer right in the center that we're not using. So maybe we can reuse this landscape of roofs, and more people are getting really enthusiastic about it. And even in the future, looking at Hamburg, maybe it's good to have a second layer in your city in case of a big flood. And the interesting thing is, a lot of people think, okay, but there is a competitive, it's competitive when you look at mitigation and adaptation, for example, but the solar panel on a green roof is more effective. So it is smart to combine, and that's what we are going to do. Another next level topic, you could say, is so far the Dutch, we have been focusing on prevention. We have a very, very robust, strong levee system. But now because of climate change and the end of the limits that we see, that we have reached in technical solutions, is we also have to start thinking about the second layer of safety, and that's are you prepared when it happens? And the third layer of safety is evacuation. And you could say the fourth layer is how to recover. So that's completely different from, for example, the United States. In Manhattan, or in New York, they have not been investing in prevention, but they are relatively good in evacuation. But now they discovered after Sandy, we also have to invest in prevention, and we have to start investing and thinking about the other layers. So we can learn from each other. But of course, this is, by the way, a still from a movie, a series called Als de Dijken Breken. Very bad acting, so a lot of people stopped watching. But regarding the content, it was really a good movie actually, because it created awareness about what might happen. Because the water is not gone within a few hours; it will be there maybe for a week, and the whole electrical system, the infrastructure, will be disrupted. But we cannot climate-proof, waterproof our whole city. That's impossible. But what we can do is to identify the vital, the critical infrastructure like hospitals and power stations, etc. And maybe we have to develop, we have to adjust the standards for this critical infrastructure. And another thing is, talking about evacuation, when there is a flood, of course the chance is very small, but when there is a major flood, a levee breakthrough, then only 15% of the citizens will be able to get out of the region, because the city is below sea level. And that's what you see in the movie. People run to the car and they get in a traffic jam, but the road is below sea level. So you're waiting to get drowned, because you're stuck. So we have to start thinking about vertical evacuation, and that's part of our national Delta program, and we are a big stakeholder in that national Delta program. I see my role to get this higher on the agenda, and maybe we have to decide not to do it, but then we make a decision, and now we just say we have to start thinking about it. And there are, of course, cities in the world that have more experiences with this. And one interesting example is we are, I think, going to design a used football stadium. Maybe they will start to play better football than I know. But a used, and I asked the designer of this and the project manager of this stadium, did you took into account a possible shelter function of that new stadium? Because it's a waterfront building, 6-7 stories, with a lot of facilities regarding drinking and eating stuff, and it's even allowed to stand alone regarding electricity, so you're already nearly there. But nobody so far took into account a possible shelter function. And I think, and we are going to develop, we have a huge high-rise program, and these aspects should be taken into account more when we are going to design new buildings. And another interesting thing is where you see the crossover between also mitigation and adaptation. We have a huge e-mobility program. I think we have the highest density of charging poles for cars, electrical cars. And all those dots along the river are power units or charging poles for electrical cars. But Stedin, the utility company, was not aware of the fact that it's a river zone, it's a flood risk zone, and maybe now it's okay, but maybe within 10 years there will be a little bit more water. So they have to adjust the sensitive equipment and put it on a higher level, or make it waterproof or whatever. But it sounds maybe even silly, but this happens in the city when you have a lot of stakeholders and departments not working together. And even another thing is that, okay, our systems are getting more and more complex. We are getting more and more dependent on IT, because we are working on all kinds of smart solutions, and therefore more depending on energy. And this is not Rotterdam, of course, this is Manhattan after Sandy. And the water was gone within for a few hours. But during 3 days there was no electrical power in that black area. And that was actually the biggest problem. So it was also for us a wake up call. How resilient is our infrastructure? And again, it's impossible to make the whole infrastructure waterproof, but we at least should start thinking about waterproofing the vital pieces and the vital parts of it. Well, again, because and the fact that we are investing in smart solutions is creating new vulnerabilities, because related to a flood, you can have a power blackout, and it's even related to our water management story. And so we have a huge water-related infrastructure, barriers, pumping stations, and it's all automated, all dependent on IT. So even that we have really a good system and dry feet because of the system, then when there's a flood, or you can be hacked, this is all hackable. I'm pretty sure that the storm sewage area is quite safe, but they really we're testing it. But our pumping stations are not safe. Right now, I think next week I will get a report about how vulnerable our pumping stations are regarding cyber resilience, regarding the hacking part. So, how cyber resilient is our city? And one example how things are interrelated. 1.5 years was one big container company, terminal had been hacked in the port. And after 3 days, this company was using literally paper and pencil to do the administration, and they did not have a clue where to start. But in these containers, the stuff that we use in our city, or even upstream in Germany. And so in theory, one hack, or maybe also practical, one hack can be disruptive for a city. And cyber resilience is complex because nobody feels owner. There's not one stakeholder, but we all, you and me, but also the companies, but also the municipality, everybody has a role in cyber resilience, you could say. So the port appointed the world first port cyber resilience officer, that's his name, title. And nowadays I have a colleague for the city itself, cyber resilience officer. She has her own budget now. So that's also one of my roles, to address this, and then there is a program manager, and then it's not solved, but it's on the agenda, and that's what I try to achieve. And of course, so far I talked about themes, you could say cyber, energy, etc., and the crossovers, but it's all coming together spatially in the city, on the level of a district, for example. And this district, BOTU, is an abbreviation for Bospolder Tussendijken, well, you can forget that. But that are 2 districts belonging to the top 5 poorest districts in Holland. Very low income, huge rate of unemployment. 50% of the kids do not have a diploma. When you look at the figures, you think, is this Holland? It's actually amazing. And so, so I can go along the door with my strategy and say we have to convince you, we have to do something regarding climate adaptation. But that's not a smart entry point. But social resilience is here the entry point. And the challenge now is how can we use again the energy transition and our investments in climate adaptation also to get this district on a higher social resilience level. And the mayor has said, okay, well, let's design a 10-year program to get this district at least on the average social index of the city using these transitions. And that's interesting. I cannot give results so far, but the idea, of course, is, for example, when we have to install a lot of solar panels, why not educate people from that district to install them or maintain them? Or when we are going to green the city, educate people to maintain this, etc. And we do have examples of this, and it's maybe small scale, but it's a start. And it's also about community building, community resilience. And although it belongs to the poorest district, people are happy to live here. So that's also one of the challenges, is how we need a little bit of gentrification, but to a certain level. And that's how can you manage this? That's complex. And we will focus on, maybe interesting to say, on resilient schools, because literally physically, technically, the school yards and the schools have to become more sustainable and climate resilient and energy resilient, etc. But if we are able to involve the kids and the parents, then it can be a kind of a crystal point for resilience in that district. And we learned that from Paris, because Paris started the School Oasis project. It's in Google and it's really impressive. But they were inspired by our water squares. And so they said, okay, you are doing water squares and combining several challenges. And they transformed that thinking to their schools, because schools are equally distributed all over the city. Everybody is within a few 100 meters of a school. So if we can start working on resilience on the schools and then involve the districts, that's an interesting philosophy. And now some of the citizens, the residents in this district, will go in January to Paris to meet their peers in Paris. So that's a really nice example of how cities can work together and learn from each other. This is actually not on a district level, but on a building level. The resilient paperclip. Well, you know why this name has been come up with this name. Also, 125 nationalities, huge unemployment, and the housing corporation, Vestia in this case, decided to reconstruct and to to give the building a facelift, but on a traditional way. They just wanted to paint it and simply said and renew the roof, etc. And we were able to convince them, well, if you now, this is a momentum to do it in a more resilient way. And we had a high ambition level, and we're not going to reach that, but something in the middle. So we were able to educate people to help in the painting stuff. And we are going to invest in a green roof, or they are going to invest in a green roof. We were able to get some European funding. There's even a beekeeper on that roof, etc. It will sell honey, and it's done in the same time with the redesigning of the public space around this. And it sounds easy, but the public space is another department within the city. And normally that's not done together. Yeah? So working in an integrated way in a city, which is a complex system, is going relatively well when you look at the content. But for example, budget-wise, that's still a struggle, because all the budgets in all the cities, they are allocated to maintenance or development or whatever, and also have different time schedules. And so, but now we want to do this all at once, together, and that's what we are trying to. That's a pilot, but we have to learn from this and try to share these experiences, of course. I'm nearly there. So this is the tough part, because resilience should not depend on me as a person or my team, but it's more and more important that everybody applies this resilience lens. That's why we are developing the scan, the resilience scan, and it's actually a relatively simple tool. It asks you questions about did you take into account these certain shocks and stresses? Did you take into account the goals of the strategy? But more important, did you work and applied the resilience qualities? And it will not give you a number, a rating of, but it will open a dialogue about, okay, cyber resilience is a complete blank spot. So let's find some experts that can help you on that one. So I think it's a start in embedding the resilience thinking in the city, and maybe not really expected, but we also try to work together with the culture and the art sector, because via art and cultural events we can work on awareness. And that's interesting. Yeah? So there's one guy, and he is going to launch the city opera in May next year, and the title is The Ring of Resilience. I didn't come up with this title, but we are helping him with the content. And so we would like that when people use the word resilience, that we are using it a little bit in the same way. And even the Eurovision One Festival, it will be used because maybe you saw it on the news that they are also going to get people on board, volunteers. So it's on the south bank of Rotterdam, the poorer part of the city. So we are going to have a lot of volunteers of people, and with this volunteerial job, they are creating more skills and having bigger chances on the market. So there is a connection with social resilience. So I already mentioned, I think it's really important and has a added value to be a member of a city network. And so I'm glad that we were selected already 5 years ago by this network. And for example, regarding water, it's more that we help other cities, but regarding other topics like social resilience, we can really learn also from other cities. And now Mexico City has developed a water square, and Surat in India is going to develop 7 water squares. It's really funny to see. Well, work together with your knowledge institutes. So that's funny. I studied physical geography here at the university in Utrecht, but of course it's interesting to see. Now I'm really into practice, but we still need more knowledge development. So we are still pioneering. So it's interesting stuff for a lot of students, I think. And the 4 technical universities, including Molenaar, they set up a center for resilient engineering, and that's. But they're also looking for case studies. Well, our city can be a case study, and our asset management department, they have a lot of questions, and they can put it on the table of this center. Well, this is the mayor. With the mayor, we were in Brownsville, in New York, learning about how they were really working with the community and working on social resilience. Actually, that's the advantage when the government doesn't have a strong, is as strong as in our country, that the community resilience is quite well developed in the US, and we can learn from that. Well, this may be a little bit a complex thing to look at, but what I want to show you is that in the last, especially to climate adaptation, climate resilience, we have been able to design or develop a kind of an ecosystem on this topic, and that's important because you will get mass, but also you become less dependent on the politicians. And so, of course, you need leadership from the politicians, but every 4 years you have other parties, and but we need continuity when it goes regarding resilience. So it's good that we have all kinds of programs and events that gain us and help us with knowledge development, and that we are using this to develop strategies. But we also have innovation programs. We are still pioneering, but we also have to apply it and have visible pilots to show and convince other people. But we're also a member of networks and organizing conferences. So next year, actually, by the way, in the week of the 21st of October, there will be a huge climate adaptation week in the Netherlands, with a focus in Rotterdam. And Groningen, but that's a different story, in Amsterdam. But that's I think, part of the story, to organize these events and to get people on board, and etc. And that one of the latest, you could say, pieces of the puzzle of the ecosystem is that we were able to attract, become hosting city for the Global Center on Adaptation. And that's relatively new. I'm now involved as a city expert for 1 day a week, and the interesting thing is there is the CEO, Patrick Verkooyen, guy on the left. He was able to set up our global commission on adaptation, and that's chaired by Ban Ki-moon and Georgieva, I think it's the name of the woman, and Bill Gates, with a lot of commissioners, and these commissioners are heads of states. And this commission is coming to Holland, unfortunately not to Rotterdam, but to the other big city, Amsterdam. But it's another story. But it's interesting to have this in our city, and we hope to open a floating office in Rijnhaven, so that will be a new impulse for our floating ambitions. A floating office for this center. And well, of course, a lot of theory, a lot of abstract stuff, but I also say, be creative. It's also sometimes it's common sense. This is the owner of our cafe, and during a heat wave, this is his way to work on resilience, and it's fine. That's it. Super.
One thing conspicuously lacking from your slides, very interesting presentation, my compliments, is